In my first two videos on the topic of the lost city of Atlantis, I connected the dots on more than a dozen similarities between Plato's description of Atlantis to that of the Rekhat structure, which is commonly referred to as the Eye of the Sahara and is located in a remote region of northwest Africa in the country of Mauritania. And my argument in those videos was that these similarities are so numerous and so precise that the Rekhat structure should be considered as the most likely location for this lost ancient civilization. However, nothing is certain, and it is undoubtedly the subject of much debate. But if after watching those first two videos you still doubted the possibility that the Rekhat structure could be the location of Atlantis, well, in this video, I'm going to share with you some new details that I just came across that makes the case that the Eye of Africa is not just the most likely location of Atlantis, but the connection of these added details I'm about to share makes this case so compelling that it's practically definitive. So let me jump right into these details, and afterwards I'll connect the dots on everything so we can see exactly what we're dealing with here. Like I stated in my first video, the legend of Atlantis originates from the ancient Egyptians, and the Greek lawmaker Solon recorded this information while visiting Egypt some 2,600 years ago, and the information was passed down through 6 generations to Plato, who published the account of Atlantis in the Timaeus and Critias dialogues some 2,400 years ago, and is apparently the only reason why we know about the legend of Atlantis today. Plato stated that the king of the capital of Atlantis was named Atlas, who was the firstborn son of Poseidon, and of course, like I mentioned before, Poseidon had 10 children through 5 sets of twins, and each one of those 10 children went on to rule each of those 10 kingdoms that made up the empire of Atlantis. Now, remember the name Atlas and hold that thought for a moment as I share something else that will connect the dots on this new information. There is a group of people that used to be referred to as the Maori. However, in modern times, they are now known as the Berber people, which inhabit a region of northwest Africa. A region once referred to as Mori, but now known as Maghreb, which essentially makes up modern-day Numidia, Morocco, West Algeria, and Mauritania. In fact, the name Mauritania comes from the Maori people. Now, does anyone happen to know the name of who was said to be the first king of Mauritania? Well, it was someone who just so happened to be named Atlas, the legendary king of the Maori people. What a coincidence. But of course, there can be no possible connection to Atlas, the king of Atlantis, because after all, there is simply no way that Atlantis could ever have been in the remote region of northwest Africa. Now hold that thought for a moment too, as I share something else with you that you've likely never seen or heard of before. There was an ancient Greek man named Herodotus who lived some 2,500 years ago, who you may be familiar with as being known as the father of history, made famous for his documentation of the Greco-Persian Wars. Herodotus was born nearly 75 years after Solon had died, and again, Solon was the person who documented the story of Atlantis from the ancient Egyptians. Herodotus himself also died when Plato was just 2 years old, so he never knew either of them, and subsequently died many years before Plato had ever published the account of Atlantis. One of Herodotus' notable achievements was developing what was then the most accurate mapping of the known inhabited world at the time of 450 BC. First, let's orient ourselves here. We can clearly see Italy, the Mediterranean Sea, the countries that surround it, the Caspian Sea, the Red Sea, the Nile Delta, to name a few notable features. And let me transition to a different version of the map so we can see things more clearly, but if you look to the left, what do you see there? That's right, the word Atlantis, which is shown to be located south of the Pillars of Hercules, or the Strait of Gibraltar, and positioned in northwest Africa. Let me first say that I do not know how or why Herodotus came to this conclusion, as this is something that I need to research more, but I look forward to any insight that people will be sharing in the comments related to his development of this map and why he claimed that Atlantis was in that specific location. You'll also notice on this map the detailing of a mountain chain just south of the Strait of Gibraltar, known today as the Atlas Mountains, which are also known to be home of the Berber people, which I mentioned earlier. And these mountains were in fact named after Atlas, the first king of Mauritania. You know, something else that's interesting to point out, when you research Atlas, the king of Mauritania, there seems to be no connection to Atlantis. I assume that this is related to the fact that nobody has ever considered that the location of Atlantis could be hiding in plain sight in the Western Sahara Desert in what is now Mauritania. Let me take a quick moment to thank John for leaving this outstanding comment, which brought the information of the first king of Mauritania as well as Herodotus' map to my attention, something that I was otherwise unaware of, and I suspect that goes to most everyone else watching this video. So let me clarify where we're at right now. There is a 2,500-year-old map that annotates the location of Atlantis in Northwest Africa, seemingly in the exact location of the Ricat structure. And this map was created by the so-called Father of History, a trusted source of documentation praised by modern-day historians for his ability to systematically document information in vivid detail. Then we have this mysterious and incredibly unique structure in Mauritania known as the Ricat. This structure just so happens to be made of concentric circles, just as Plato had stated. But not only that, it consists of the precise amount of rings, 3 that would be of water and 2 of land. And on top of that, it just so happens to be the precise size of how Atlantis was described, measuring 23.5 kilometers or 14.5 miles across when computed in modern-day measurements. It also has an opening to the south that would match Atlantis' description of connecting to the sea, and in fact, its very appearance today seems to suggest that it did. It has mountains to the north, and not only that, the mountains to the north contained rivers. The entire area surrounding the Ricat is a large level plain. The sides of Atlantis were said to be steep towards the side of the sea, and the Adra Highlands located in this area have a steep 1,500-foot drop from cliffside to its base. Even more significantly, the center island of the Ricat produces fresh spring water, just as Plato specified, and this is despite the wells in the surrounding area producing exclusively salt water, which also is further evidence that this site was once under the ocean. The area around the Ricat has an abundance of black, red, and white color stone. And Atlantis was said to have an abundance of elephants, which elephants exist in Mauritania today, and depictions of elephants can be seen in cave art close to the Ricat structure. There are even relics including pottery shards, arrowheads, and other evidence that a civilization once lived there, yet archaeologists have no idea what civilization they belong to or when. And all of this is in Mauritania, where people who were once known as the Maori people were led by a legendary king whose name was Atlas, the same exact name as the king of Atlantis. But on top of all of this, it just so happens to be in the exact location that is annotated on an ancient map that was created by who we refer to as the Father of History. I mean, this is an X marks the spot if there ever was one, especially when you consider the nature of the many precise similarities between the Ricat structure and Plato's description of Atlantis. Now for me, this is more than compelling. This is Atlantis, despite the fact that yes, this site today is nearly 1,300 feet above sea level. Because the scientific explanation for the Ricat's creation would make sense for it to be Atlantis when you simply compare it to what Plato had stated about Atlantis' destruction, describing how an earthquake caused Atlantis to sink into the depths of the ocean. Perhaps that earthquake was the Ricat itself. For example, scientists believe it went through multiple processes of being lifted up and down as its subsurface dome collapsed and later lifted again, a process that was repeated multiple times and creating the concentric circles that we see today. I mean, geologists literally describe it as a dome, so the subsurface dome collapsed, Atlantis sank, also explaining the earthquake. I mean, this seems fitting, especially when we acknowledge all of the matching precise similarities to what Plato had said, such as the concentric circles, specifically 3 of water and 2 of land, its precise size, and everything else. It certainly seems definitive to me, as this far exceeds coincidence. And you know, that reminds me, I received a comment from someone claiming to live in Mauritania and going on to mention that locals have seen various fish skeletons in the Ricat following rainstorms. If this is true, I might be willing to pay as much as 1,000 US dollars for evidence of that. If it can be video recorded in such a way that any viewer would see and know that the evidence was not planted, and if the video included detailed panorama shots of the Ricat, plus video of the GPS location, etc. If this is true, well, I can't help but think that the significant difference in value between US dollars and the currency of Mauritania, well, perhaps even just a few hundred US dollars would make it more than worth it to go out there and take pictures of any evidence that can be found, seashells, whatever, but I'll get back to that in just a moment. First, the